Good morning, everybody. Well, it really is a pleasure to be with you again and to do this particular presentation on this particular painting. Now, of all the talks that I do, and I've got many talks, this is the one. If I was to lose all my slides and I can only be allowed to keep one set of slides, it wouldn't be Van Gogh, it wouldn't be Dali, it would be this particular talk. Now, if you say, well, why is that? Well, I'm going to spend the whole of an hour talking about this one painting. Now, I cannot think of any other painting that I could spend a whole hour talking about and not bore you to death. But I call this the greatest painting of the 20th century. It is in fact called Guernica, and it was painted by Pablo Picasso. But so few people have any idea as to just what this painting is all about. Why is there a woman and child here, obviously in some form of distress? There's a bull with his tail waving in the doorway. Again, why? There's a severed arm, a severed head and another severed arm holding a broken sword at the base of the picture, and there's a horse. Now, if you look carefully at this horse, it has a lance going through the body of the horse. So this is its last breath before it falls and dies. There's a strange eye-like shape in the top of the painting, and there's a woman leaning through a window holding a paraffin lamp. There's a figure here racing in from this side and a figure here being devoured by flames. Now, just what on earth is this painting all about? Now, can I say, at the end of the talk, I'm just going to talk for underneath an hour, I'm going to put that slide back up on the screen. And I'm going to hope for two things. One, you will see the painting with totally different eyes, and two, you may well agree with me, it really is the greatest painting of the 20th century. But that particular phrase isn't my phrase. This is the biography of a painter called Graham Sutherland. Now, he died in the late 70s, and this biography was written in the early 80s. Now, to give you some idea of the stature of Graham Sutherland, when we as a country decided to honour Sir Winston Churchill when he retired from government, what we decided to present to him in the Houses of Parliament was a portrait of himself. And it was in fact Graham Sutherland that we commissioned on our behalf to paint this very powerful portrait of Sir Winston Churchill. The reference to burned here, Lady Churchill never liked the painting, and she instructed a gardener to burn it with the leaves 2 months later. So unfortunately we no longer have this very powerful portrait of Sir Winston Churchill. But after the war, when Coventry Cathedral was rebuilt, we also commissioned Graham Sutherland to do the huge tapestry on the end wall of Coventry Cathedral. So that gives you some idea of the stature of Graham Sutherland. He really was one of our leading artists in the last century. When I came to read his biography, I came across this sentence. Graham came to regard Picasso's evocation of the horror of the bombing of the Basque town in the Spanish Civil War as the great picture of the 20th century. Now, his phrase is better than mine. I'd said it's the greatest, as though we have a number of great pictures. He says it's the great picture, as though there's nothing else in contention with it. So that shows how importantly Graham Sutherland thinks of Guernica. But again, I do not know of any other car that has been named after an individual. After all, the Renault Clio is almost a fictional name. We certainly don't know who Clio is, but I don't know anybody else that has been named after a car. So that somehow does to show you the stature of Pablo Picasso. Now, to give you some idea about Pablo Picasso, when he became famous early in the last century, he gave all his early paintings to Barcelona. And now in the barrio, the old part of the town, you have the Museum Picasso. Now, when I went in, I half looked at a gallery that was on the right. It was full of academic works by his tutors, and I wasn't really too interested to know who had taught Picasso, so I didn't go into this early gallery. I went round the rest of the museum and I saw wonderful works by the young Picasso. Life drawings, still lifes, portraits, landscapes, wonderful works. Now, once I'd gone round the museum, I was then quite interested to know who had taught him. So I went into this early gallery. And when I looked at the bottom of the painting, I saw the signature Ruiz, R-U-I-Z. And I thought, now, that's funny, because you see, Ruiz was Picasso's father's name. Picasso took his mother's name, because you must admit, Ruiz is nowhere near as smooth as Picasso. But then I was in a real dilemma, because Picasso's father wasn't a painter. So I was now in a real dilemma as to who had painted this painting. Now, I don't speak Spanish at all, but there was an attendant in the gallery, and I was able to find that this painting is in fact called the First Communion. It was painted by Picasso. Now, when I tell you that Picasso was born in 1882, and you take an 8 and a 2 off a 9 and a 5, you get 13. Now, in all my many years teaching in various art colleges, I never came across a 13-year-old that could paint like that. That was a cousin who posed for him, that was Picasso's sister who posed for him, and that was Picasso's father who posed for him. This one, called The Sick Room, was painted when he was 15, and again you can see Picasso's father posing for him alongside here. So that gives you some idea of the stature of Picasso. He could paint like that at 15 and like this at 13. But one of the problems with Guernica is that if you come across it in a book or a magazine, you come across it picture postcard size. And in meeting the painting so small, you have no idea what it's about. Because this canvas is absolutely huge. It certainly wouldn't fit in here. It's almost 20 feet long by 16 feet high. It's a huge canvas. But most people meeting it so small have no idea what it's all about, or rather, where it's all about. Guernica is a small town in northern Spain. Now let me show you where this map is and where Guernica is. This is the French-Spanish border down here. If you carry along, and this is the Bay of Biscay with Biarritz just coming down from here. If you were to carry along this northern coastline, a major city would be Bilbao. But as you go up from Bilbao, you come across Guernica. So what was it that happened here that made Picasso paint the painting? Coney Aguirre was interviewed for a Channel 4 television programme. The programme was about the Spanish Civil War, and this is what she said. The 26th of April 1937. The market was held where the public gardens are now. Everything was normal, but then the planes came in that afternoon. Over the hills opposite, saw the planes arriving. There were 8 in all in a black line. I remember them black and ugly. I'll never get noise. The bombs made a kind of zizz followed by cries and a tremendous crash over and over again. I can still hear the noises and we can feel everything tremble. Smoke and heat came into the room. I can still remember, and I was only 8 years old at the time, the forces that came out. All the buildings and factories were burning, everything on fire, the sky was red. There's no war going on here. There are no armaments here. This is a little market town on a Monday afternoon, market day. Mrs. Roberts was an English lady who also took part in this Channel 4 television programme, and she went into Guernica 2 days later and she took some photographs. Along the road there were streams of refugees trudging along. I don't think they had any idea where they were going or what they were going to do. Their belongings were on carts, wheelbarrows being pushed, rather heartbreaking to see. Finally we got into Guernica itself. There wasn't a building standing. Rubble all over the place, nobody to be seen except the odd person who were looking for the bodies of friends and relatives. The place was an absolute shambles. Now, what happened in the Spanish Civil War is a certain general, General Franco, formed an army. And he rose up against the Republican government, and he was having a lot of trouble in winning his battles in this northern area of Spain. It is in fact called the Basque country. So what Franco decided to do was to go over to Germany, where he met Adolf Hitler. And he said to Hitler, would you like to bomb one of those northern towns to intimidate the Basques? They chose Guernica because it's the ancient town of the Basque culture. They chose Monday afternoon because it was market day, and the maximum number of women and children would have been in the marketplace. The men would have been in the fields around the village creating the produce the women and children were selling in the marketplace. This is an official account of what happened in Guernica. In October 1937, a Nazi staff officer told the Sunday Times correspondent, we bombed it and bombed it and bombed it. The German air race, Adolf Galland, admitted that the Germans were responsible and that they had bombed the town for 4.5 hours incessantly. Goering was in fact the head of the German Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. Goering himself admitted in 1946 that Germany had regarded Guernica as a testing ground for their new blitzkrieg bombing. Now, blitzkrieg bombing is when you lay down a pattern of bombs in an orderly fashion so that nobody can possibly survive underneath that kind of bombardment. Now, for a long time, I didn't know how many people died on that Monday afternoon. And it was only quite recently I came across this book, Images of the Spanish Civil War. And in it, I came across this sentence. Some 1,600 people were killed and 900 injured, and the town was reduced to rubble. Now, can I remind you, of that 1,600 and that 900, the vast majority were women and children. I therefore decided to go and have a look at Guernica. And as I drove through the northern plains of Spain, on the way there I passed a tumble-down, ramshackled little village. I thought, honestly, if they bombed that, I couldn't care less, because it's almost completely derelict anyway. But you see, this was Guernica. When I got to Guernica, I had the surprise of my life. Now look, I come from Lancashire. Lancashire is known as a very wet county. This is the wettest part of Europe. It really reminded me of home and of Lancashire. The planes would have flown around the hills here, come down the valley and dropped all their bombs on the town. Do you know, I've read with good report that the press were told about this beforehand, and they had all their correspondents on the hills around Guernica watching the destruction of the town. It's a pity somebody didn't tell the people of Guernica itself. The town itself is very, very simple. You have one road that runs through the centre of the town. This is the Basque spelling. We tend to soften it. We go Guernica and not the rather harsh Guernica. Now, in all honesty, everybody, if you couldn't see Bilbao there, then this could be any English town centre on a rainy afternoon. And the idea of bombing that, just such a new form of bombardment, is in fact horrific. So that's what happened in Guernica. The marketplace today is just stepped up from the colonnaded area, this particular area here. So that's where the marketplace is today. The year before, in 1936, the Spanish Republican government had asked Picasso, who is living in Paris, if he would do a painting for them for a huge international exhibition in Paris in 1937. Now, in 1936, Picasso did nothing about this painting whatsoever. But when the news broke of the bombing of Guernica in April 1937, he decided to use that as a subject for his painting. Now, I wondered, what would Picasso have read in the newspaper? He would have mostly taken Humanité, because that had the story of the bombing. I went along to the Times newspaper offices, and I went through all their files, and I found the newspaper for 2 days after the bombing. the 28th of April 1936. And here it is, the tragedy of Guernica, town destroyed by air attack, eyewitnesses account. Now this tells you what I've already presented to you. But as you come down the column, you come across this paragraph. The tactics of the bombers, which may have interested students of the new military science, were as follows. First, small part of airplanes with heavy bombs and hand grenades all over the town, shooting area after area in an orderly fashion. Next came fighting machines which swooped low to machine gun those who ran in panic in the dugouts. And the idea of running figures is something you see Picasso use. And then 2 days later in the Times, there was that photograph of the centre of Guernica. Now, can I say, everybody, the world lost its innocence on that day. Up until then, soldiers had fought soldiers. Armies had fought armies. Never before, in a non-war situation, had a population, a civilian population, been targeted and almost completely wiped out. There were questions in the House of Lords, questions in the House of Commons. The story ran and ran and ran for months afterwards. The world lost its innocence on that day. So Picasso decided to use that as a subject for his painting. Now, he had a huge studio in the very centre of Paris on Les Rues des Grands Augustins. Now, unfortunately, in the 70s, this particular building was refurbished and made into apartments. So, unfortunately, this room no longer exists. But if you notice these roof beams here, the canvas that Picasso will get into this studio is the biggest possible canvas that he can get in here. At this time, he had a girlfriend or a mistress called Dora Maar. Now, she was a Croatian refugee living in Paris. And it turns out that Dora Maar was the only person allowed into that studio while Picasso was painting Guernica. And what she had the brilliant sense to do was to take a camera in there with her. And she photographs this huge canvas as it did. Honestly, everybody, you can see genius at work. You can see Picasso working out his ideas on the actual canvas. Quite unique. Picasso never ever allowed this to happen again. Now listen, everybody, you may well think I'm talking about people who've been dead a long time. Dora Maar only died last year. I wish I'd have known, because I'd love to have met her and talked to her about these amazing photographs that she actually took. Dora Maar also photographed all the first sketches for Guernica, and I must say the first one is incredibly brief. We have a woman, or a head rather, leaning through a window holding something. We then have a horse here with its head upraised. We then have a bull with his tail waving, and we have something fallen at the base of the drawing. And it's the first drawing done on the 1st of May 1937. Now just what on earth is this all about? Would we have had a horse and a bull in Guernica? Well, in all honesty, you could have done, because it was a small market town. But Picasso's looking for symbols. And in order to interpret those symbols, I've got to take you to the bullfight. Now, I can immediately say, however unobjectionable bullfighting is, I'm not going to show you any unobjectionable sides. But it is important to know who does what in that arena to understand the images that Picasso is going to use. The matadors come into the arena with a lot of pomp and of ceremony. The next thing that comes into the arena is in fact a killing machine. This bull is bred to kill. All its instincts are to kill. If you or I were stupid enough to come into that arena when the bull's allowed in, it would kill you without a second thought. I will see the bull as sheer animal aggression. Those officers that instructed those aeroplanes to overfly the town of Guernica and completely destroy it. The next thing that happens in the arena is the matador comes in with a cloak and does what we call passes as the bull charges past him. But this is the absolute horror of bullfighting. There is no way that man can fight that bull. The bull is much too strong. So in order to make it fightable, it has to be wounded. And in order to do that,
a picador comes in on a horse with a lance to wound the bull. But I don't want you to look at that. What I want you to look at is the horse. It's blindfold. It can't even see where it is. And you know, I've read on Good Report it's had its vocal cords cut. So it can't even cry out in protest at the situation it finds itself in. Can you imagine how terrified that horse must be? Not only as it smells the blood of the arena, but it then feels the bull charging into it. And you could surmise, well, I suppose one or two horses get knocked over, and I suppose one or two of them get slightly injured. This is the biography of El Cordobés. Now, he was a bullfighter fighting in the 70s. Or, I'll dress you in mourning. In it, I came across this sentence. Antonio Cruz was Spain's leading exploiter of the corrida's most loathsome yet lucrative commercial byproducts. He was a horse contractor. He supplied every major bull ring south of Madrid with horses used by the picadors during the bullfight. The economics of this new business were quite simple. He was obliged to have 36 horses on hand for a fight with fully grown bulls. Cruz's most disastrous season was 1925. That year he lost 694 horses in the bull ring. All that ended with the introduction of canvas covering for the horses in 1928. Nevertheless, this man had sent 13,000 horses out to die in the bull ring. So I really will see the horse as the symbol of absolute innocence. It can't see where it is, it can't protest at the situation it finds itself in. So these are the two main symbols that Picasso will use. There's the first sketch. I love the second sketch that Picasso does. He wants to remind himself of what makes up a horse. He's got a head at the front, a tail at the back, 2 legs at the front, 2 legs at the back. If Picasso wants to do a horse in its death agony, he can do that without any difficulty whatsoever. And you can see here that this is, in fact, a head and an arm which is holding something. And then Picasso plays about with the kind of abstraction he's going to use in the painting. He will only use this form of abstraction once for Guernica itself. Now we're going through the early days of May as Picasso is just clarifying his ideas. The woman is leaning through the window holding a small candlelight. Most dastardly deeds and bombing raids are done in the dark of night with nobody looking on. Picasso wants the gentle side of our species to light up the carnage, to show it to the world for what it is. So that's why she's holding a candlelight. The bull leaps with glee at the carnage it's produced, and the innocent horse lies fallen, crushed, dying at the base of the drawing. And then there are some fallen figures at the base of the drawing. So Picasso's just going through the early days of May, clarifying his ideas. The bull dominates the central part of the drawing, happy at the carnage produced. We now know that this is the last breath of the horse at which it protests at man's inhumanity to man, because if you look, its little horse's heart with a pair of wings is about to fly up to heaven. And then at the base of the drawing there's a Greek warrior with a spear. Now I think what Picasso's thinking about here, there were no soldiers in Guernica, but it is always the soldiers that die in war situations. A whole generation of young men were wiped out in the First World War, and Picasso lost 3 close friends, so he wants to salute the soldier. Now you can't put a soldier in Guernica because there were no soldiers in Guernica, so he thinks of a symbolic Greek warrior with a helmet and a spear. Although you will see Picasso will resolve this problem differently in the painting itself. So we're still going through the early days of May. He does 2 studies of the fallen horse. And I was going to say he uses a form of cubism, but it isn't cubes. It's just flat, angular shapes all the way through. And Picasso will only use this style for Guernica. He'll never use this style again. He does another study of the woman and child and the horse with its head tucked down underneath, about to fall and to die. Now, in the press reports, it said that as people ran down the streets, they were followed by low-flying aircraft that machine-gunned them to death. So Picasso has a running mother and child. But there are many elements in this drawing which will not appear in the painting. We'll get no bared breasts in Guernica, indeed we'll get no rounded shapes in Guernica. Rounded shapes are comforting shapes, and there's no comfort in Guernica. It'll be harsh angles all the way through. We'll get no blood in Guernica. If you kill somebody in a rage, the judge says, oh, you weren't yourself at the time, we'll forgive you. Whereas if you killed somebody in a cold and calculated manner, once you would have been taken out and hung. So there's no blood in Guernica. This is cold and calculated and therefore incredibly powerful. There won't even be a basque head dress in Guernica. Again, this is going to be a protest painting for every situation of man's inhumanity to man. So he just doesn't want to pin it down only to Guernica. There won't even be any colour in Guernica. When Spielberg made his film Schindler's List about the extermination of 6 million innocent people just because they had to be born Jews, he insisted that film was shot in black and white. He knew that colour is attractive, beguiling and seductive, and there's none of that in Guernica, and there was none of that in the Holocaust. So it'll be black, white and greys all the way through. So there are many elements. The basque headdress won't appear, the rounded forms won't appear, the blood won't appear. It's going to be a protest for every situation of man's inhumanity to man. Now we're coming towards the middle of May, and Picasso must have started to think about the overall shape of the biggest canvas that he could get into the studio. So he opens out either side of the working drawings. And then he goes to the final drawing before he goes on to the painting. And you've now become very familiar with all our antagonists. The bull with his tail waving dominates that half of the picture. Sheer aggression. The woman leaning through the window is showing the scene to the world with the light to show the carnage for what it is. The innocent... Actually, Picasso makes a mistake here. He puts a cartwheel alongside the horse. Now that would make you think it's a cart horse. It isn't. It's a horse that dies needlessly for entertainment in the bull ring. So that wheel will not appear in the painting, but the horse's head is fallen and dying. We've then got figures over here, and at the base of the drawing there's a figure racing in on this particular side, and look at this. That is a very powerful symbol. Mandela always does this. It's a symbol of brotherhood, of solidarity and togetherness. It's a very powerful symbol. Now just look what Picasso now does with this particular symbol. Here is Dora Maar's first drawing of the actual canvas itself. Here are those roof beams, so you can see it's the biggest possible canvas that Picasso can get into that particular studio. And Picasso stands about that high in front of the canvas. Look at this warrior figure. His feet start here, and we go up his body, and then we go 18 feet to the top of the canvas with his fist of protest. He can't defend himself, because if you come down the arm and come along to this hand, he's holding a broken sword. And Picasso will make that even more powerful in the next photograph. The bull dominates this central area of the picture, happy at the carnage it produced. It was women and children who died in Guernica. The woman leans through the window, and the candle turns into a little bit of sophistication, a paraffin lamp. I'll explain why that is in a few slides' time. The horse's head is tucked underneath, about to fall and to die. A figure comes racing in on this side, and the figure here is being devoured by flames in the little house. But just look at this. Now, somewhere in literature, there is in fact a phrase, and I don't know if it's in the Bible or if it's in Shakespeare, that the earth itself ought to protest at the amount of human blood that we've spilt on it over the centuries. And Picasso now puts a fistful of earth within that hand. And in order to bring it out from the rest of the painting, he surrounds it with a kind of sun-like shape. But Picasso's realised he's making a mistake here. His symbol of innocence is in fact the horse. So as Picasso blocks in the face of the horse and goes down the body of the horse, he's taking this out. Because it is in fact the horse which is his symbol of innocence. And as you can see, he's beginning to block in various areas on the canvas itself. Dora Maar, and he now blocks in, she also takes details of the painting, and you can see he's blocked in and almost finished the horse's head. But he must have been unhappy, because the horse's head is in fact upside down. It really is amazing how little Picasso does to turn this horse's head, which is upside down, to make it the right way round. He takes the nose from here and drops it in up here. He takes the ears from here and drops them in up there, and the eyes from there and drops them in up here. And with the minimum amount of effort, he's brought the horse's head the right way round. But he's made a problem for himself. He's taken out this fist that was here and put a kind of eye-like shape at the top of the painting. Now, in all paintings, there are what we call compositional lines, and these are lines that guide your eye around the painting. There's a strong diagonal, starts with this foot here, comes along all these edges, comes along here, and ends up at this area here. There's another diagonal, starts with that heel, comes along all these edges, and ends up just here. That's a major part of the picture. Once Picasso's taken that fist out, he's got to put something in its place. And in all honesty, he's got to go back to that very first working drawing. In the first drawing, the horse's head was upraised. Even on the 2nd of May, he'd done 2 studies of the horse's head upraised. He'd even done a painted study. Picasso's got to go back to that initial idea and lift up the horse's head. And you can see the horse's head had been down here, and he's now lifted the whole head up, so it's now in this area here. That used to be the tail of the bull, and it now becomes the mane of the horse. And in order to keep the horse's head clear from the bull, he now swings the bull's back over here, and the tail flies up into the top corner. And as you can see, he's blocked in many, many areas all the way throughout the canvas. And you can now see that this is the last breath of the horse, at which it protests at man's inhumanity to man, because there's a lance going through the body of the horse, and this is its last breath before it falls and dies. This is looking very chaotic over here. He's got to resolve just what's happening here. And as to the wallpaper here, well, he's not going to make the whole thing into a collage. But in a few slides' time, you will see, in order to bring the body of the horse out from the rest of the painting, he will texture the body of the horse. And I think this wallpaper is giving some idea of the scale. But he's got to resolve just what's happening over at this area here. Dora Maar took a photograph of Picasso alongside the canvas, just to give you some idea of the sheer scale of the canvas. And it is in fact only house paint. He had a pot of black and a pot of white, and in the other little pots he mixed up the various greys. And Dora Maar even took a photograph of Picasso actually working on the canvas itself. We're now coming towards the end of May, the 27th of May, as Picasso does this little quick sketch for the figure with upraised arms at this side of the canvas. He then does a study of the hand which is holding the broken sword at the base of the painting, And if you look, it's got too many fingers and thumbs. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What a solid and chunky hand it is. He now does a study, he now clarifies the way the picture is developing. You can see the horse's head so much clearer, and you can also see the body of the horse so much clearer. Here is a figure that is stayed in one of the little houses and is being devoured by flames. And you can see he's blocked in many areas all the way through. This is looking very chaotic here. He's got to resolve just what's happening here at the base of the painting. And then Picasso goes and does something which had me baffled for a long time. I always forget to say, because we've taken it for granted, this is an outdoor scene. These are roof tiles here, and that's a little window. Picasso will make the whole painting into a room. He'll bring a diagonal down here and another diagonal down here, and he'll make the whole thing into an interior. Now that had me baffled for a long time. But he's got to resolve just what's happening here at the base of the painting. It's all looking very disjointed. And this idea of having a head so near the base of the canvas, seemingly looking out of the canvas, is very distracting. Picasso now does... Oh, I always forget when that slide's going to appear. That's the projector telling me it wants me to change its slides. And I always forget when that particular slide is going to appear. But you'll see that Picasso now does a very simple study of the hand, which is at the base of the painting. And as I was saying, this head so near the base of the canvas is very distracting, because it drops your eye out of the canvas. He now does this childlike drawing of a sightless head. There's no sight in those eyes, they just swim vacantly in an empty face. There's no breath in that mouth. It's a dead warrior's head. But notice it's moving upwards. Now, Dora Maar only took one photograph of Picasso actually painting on the canvas. And you've got to look very carefully at this photograph just to understand where Picasso's working. Can you see we've got the head looking down here? And Picasso introduces a mouth to the top side of that head and completely turns the head around. Now, can I say, everybody, a tremendous amount has happened between this and the last photograph. I wish Dora Maar had taken one or two photographs, because an incredible amount has happened. The first thing is, it's a room. There's a doorway here, there are tiles on the floor here, and there's a wall coming down here. Had me baffled for a long time. I said in order to bring out the body of the horse, he would texture the horse. And I think these little marks are the marks that texture the horse, just to bring these planes out from the rest of the actual painting. But just what is going on at the base of the painting? This severed arm, a severed head, and another severed arm holding a broken sword. Well, I think what gives it away is that area there and this area here. These two arms and head are hollow. If you come across a bronze war memorial, it's cast hollow. I think this is a war memorial, perhaps for the First World War, lying in pieces at the base of the painting. And in that way Picasso can salute all the young men and now all the young women who die in war situations. But finally, everybody, why did he make it into a room with a doorway here and a wall coming down here? Well, I think what's going to give it away is going to appear in this area here. An electric light bulb. Now, if I today wanted a symbol for aggressive power, I would use the mushroom cloud of the atomic bomb. After all, it was 2 atomic bombs from Hiroshima that ended the Second World War. Now, Picasso can't use the symbol of the atomic bomb now because it hadn't been devised in 1937. but it was the power of electricity that put those sparks in those internal combustion engines which overthrew the town of Guernica and completely destroyed it. The power of electricity overshadows the simple technology of the paraffin lamp. The woman from Guernica is lighting up the scene to show it to the world for what it is now. All right, perhaps now you would have street lighting in Guernica. In 1937, you definitely wouldn't have had street lighting. So if Picasso wants to put a symbolic light bulb in the painting, he's got to make the whole thing into a room. And that's how it was when it was made into a room, and it was exhibited in the Spanish Pavilion in the International Exhibition in Paris 1937. And it was in the Spanish Republican Pavilion, which is this little pavilion tucked down here alongside the huge Nazi pavilion alongside. If you wanted to know the struggle for power in Europe at this moment in time, look at this photograph. Here is the huge Russian pavilion, almost challenging the Nazi pavilion to a state of war, which was about to happen in the Second World War. But what caught everybody's imagination was in that little Spanish Republican pavilion. Nobody had ever seen an allegorical painting that was so poignant and so powerful to that particular moment in history. It was the talking point of the whole exhibition by everybody who attended the exhibition itself. And it really is an absolutely amazing painting. So here it really was the talking point of the whole of the exhibition, but in the press, and everybody went in to see this particular moment in time. And it really is incredible that there were two things that Picasso omitted to put in the painting. The first one is, which he puts in all his paintings, that famous Picasso signature. The second one is he didn't date it. And he always dates all of his paintings. Now, I don't think he put in the Picasso signature because this isn't only a protest from Picasso, this is a protest from us all of man's inhumanity to man. And the second thing, he didn't date it. Because again, he nearly always dates with Roman numerals nearly all his works. He didn't date the painting because he didn't want to pin it down to one particular moment in history. This is a protest painting for every situation of man's inhumanity to man. Now, once the exhibition closed, the painting toured Europe. It then, the following year, came over to London, where it went into the National Gallery, the Royal Academy Galleries on Piccadilly. And then from Piccadilly, it went out to the East End of London, the Whitechapel Art Gallery. And I've come across this photograph of Clement Attlee. It's amazing to me that after the Second World War, and Churchill won the war single-handedly for it. You say, rubbish, he can't win a war single-handedly. Yes, he can. He brought the Americans in. After all, when you think most Americans came from Europe, they didn't necessarily have to come in on our side. But they did, and because the Americans came in, we won the Second World War, and then we kicked Churchill out of government. And we brought in Clement Attlee. And here's Attlee talking in the East End of... And many East Enders, their wives, their women and their children, went to see Guernica in the East End. And then from London, it went to Manchester, Leeds, and then Edinburgh. And then it eventually flew over to America, to California. And then slowly through the years, it came across America, and it ended up in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Now, I hadn't seen the painting in New York, and I really did want to go and see the painting. But it really is very expensive to get over to America. And in 1970... I fell into the basement of a public house and I broke my... Can I say, everybody, I wasn't drunk. I was going into the public house and I had simply not noticed, as it was a brilliant sunny day, the first day of the summer vacation, that the landlord was having a delivery of beer. And he left the trap door open, and I walked through into the air, whistled down to the basement, and broke my right leg very badly. And I was so happy. I thought, I'm going to sue you for £2,000. And there's never any doubt as to what I was going to do with that £2,000. 2 years later, 1974, fully recovered from my broken leg. I'm on 53rd Avenue West, New York, waiting for the Museum of Modern Art to open. And when I say this is a big painting, I mean it's a big painting. You've hardly noticed the size of the hand of the woman and child on that side of the canvas. The lance that comes through the body of the horse is almost the size of my head. The horse seems to come crashing down on top of you. It is so absolutely huge. And the design of the painting is absolutely brilliant. Now, most people, if they have a toned area in a painting, they run a line around the tone. Picasso has all the lines and all the tones completely independent. There's not one line you could take away, there's not one line you could add, and everything fits together so perfectly, and everything tells its own story so perfectly. Here I'm looking at the left-hand side of the painting, and here I'm looking at the right-hand side of the painting again in my 1974 flares, and here I'm looking at a central area of the painting. It really is an absolutely amazing painting with everything fitting together so absolutely perfectly. And Picasso said to Museum of Modern Art, it's yours, but it's only on loan. If Spain becomes a democracy again, it must go to the Prado in Madrid. But it really is an absolutely incredible painting, without a doubt the greatest painting of the 20th century. And when I started off, I said that I would end by showing you the first photograph that I showed of the actual painting. And I would hope for two things. One, you would understand the painting now, and two, you may well agree with me, it really is the greatest painting of the 20th century. The bull with his tail flashing in the doorway is happy at the carnage he's produced. It was women and children who were in the marketplace on that Monday afternoon when the Germans decided to try out their new form of blitzkrieg bombing. Because the power of the 20th century, seen in those sparks, in those internal combustion engines, overflew the simple technology of the woman from Guernica holding the paraffin lamp and showing it to the world for what it is. Because innocence died on that day. And we too, with our very last breaths, ought to speak and oppose man's inhumanity to man. Because it was innocent people who died in the marketplace on that Monday afternoon. And the figures who, it even reported that figures who ran down the streets and then ran out into the fields were followed by low-flying aircraft and machine-gunned them to death. Because had they stayed in their houses, they would have been devoured by flames. We are no longer in the 20th century. And I think the further we get away from that 20th century, which really did turn out to be an absolute bloodbath of carnage, the more this will be seen as the greatest painting of the 20th century. And that, everybody, was my presentation on Picasso's Guernica. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you.